Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this week's Horticulture Town Hall. We have some really good topics to share with you today, but before we get into that, I wanted to introduce you to our horticulture specialists that will be speaking with you today. We have myself, Kelly McGowan. I am in the Springfield area. We have Jennifer Shooter in the Kirksville area. We have Tamara Rial in the Kansas City area, and we have Katie Kamler in the St. Genevieve area. I hope I didn't miss anyone on that, but here's a map with all of the horticulture specialists around the state. Feel free to reach out to us anytime that you have a question, and we are there to help you with your gardening questions. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Pat Guinan, and he is going to give us our weather report. Pat?
Sounds good. Thank you, Kelly, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll get right into it. We had a little bit of activity impacting northern Missouri last night, and the top picture does show some of the storms that fired up in Nebraska and Iowa, then clipped the northern parts of the state. Some decent totals right on the border of Iowa and Missouri. And then you can see the table here. The map below is a picture of the CoCoRaHS reports, the actual rain gauge reports that came out this morning for northern Missouri, since that's where all the precip fell across the state over the past 24 hours. And there were some decent totals. And, you know, these are areas here that actually welcome the rainfall because it's been very dry in some of these northwestern counties. You can see these two locations in Worth County and over an inch of rain, and then a little bit further east, Mercer County near Princeton had 1.5 inches, and over in Scotland and Schuyler County, 1/3 of an inch and a little over a half inch here near Lancaster. But some decent rainfall on the border, but we actually could use more across other parts of the state. This is the radar estimates over the past week since we last met through about 7 o'clock this morning. You can see some decent totals here in west central Missouri where it was badly needed. So very dry in west central sections, and they got the rain, and that was very beneficial. Other pockets in southeast and on the northeast corner of the state border in Illinois. And you can see some of the 7-day totals in southwest Missouri, Greene County, just near Ash Grove. They had over 4 inches. Dade County and parts of southwest Missouri over 3 3/4 inches. In southeast Missouri, Cape Girardeau had 3.5 inches. Look at this area in western Tennessee. I want to point that out because that was a historic rainfall event. Unfortunately, some terrible flooding and flood-related fatalities. Over 17 inches of rain over a 24-hour period that fell. And so indeed, some extreme precipitation just to the east and southeast of the Boot Hills. So some big totals in parts of western Tennessee. Over the past 30 days, it really sort of shows who's been getting the rain and who hasn't as we go through towards the end of summer. Some big totals in northeast Missouri, west central. These red indicates more than 5 inches. That's where we have above normal precip over the past 4 weeks. In parts of southeast Missouri, look here near Poplar Bluff in Butler County, over 10 inches according to this radar estimate. These greens is where we need to focus where the dryness is, where we've been really dry here, right in mid-Missouri, parts of east central Missouri, some scattered areas here in southwest Missouri. That's where we've seen some very dry conditions. And on the bottom here, on the left, in the blue, are some of the highest totals over the past 4 weeks. And on the right are some of the areas that have just been missing out on these rain events over the past month. And again, Poplar Bluff, over 13 inches of rain over the past 4 weeks. Parts of northeast Missouri, southeast Missouri, really kind of matching up what the radar is indicating where the heaviest rain has fallen over the past 30 days. And then some of these totals here in southwest Missouri, Newton County's had only 4,100s. Right here in Boone County, it's very dry. We've only had 7,900s around Ashland. Here at the University of Missouri, over the past 4 weeks, we've had just a little over an inch, well below normal. So hopefully we'll be getting some decent rain over the next 7 days with the forecast. Right now, we are in the heat and humidity again. It's the last week of August, and it's going to go out hot and humid. And you can see in the upper left, this area here, all this orange shading are heat advisories for today and into tomorrow. And for Missouri, That heat advisory extends until tomorrow evening. We're anticipating with these high temperatures and high humidities, we could see heat index values up to 110 degrees. So obviously be very careful. I'll drink plenty of water, wear loose fitting, light colored clothing if you're going to be outside, and try to spend as much time in the air conditioning and shade as possible. These temperatures are going to stick around, this heat and humidity for today and tomorrow, especially. I think they will be tempered somewhat as we go into the weekend. And then we start to see some more scattered showers and thunderstorms, perhaps impacting much of the state on Sunday. I do want to note this radar picture that was taken about 5 minutes ago does show a cluster of storms that's hanging in there. They're right here it looks like centered in Daviess County. This area of storms is moving to the east-southeast. And so perhaps if it holds together and it goes through into the mid-afternoon when we have some very unstable air here in mid-Missouri, that system could perhaps propagate and intensify. So something to keep an eye on with this outflow boundary as it sinks east and southeastward. We could see some showers and thunderstorms, and we need it here in central Missouri. So hopefully there's an outside chance that we will. And if we do, we're going to see more clouds. And so those temperatures perhaps won't go out of control like they're forecasting. Of course, if the sun stays out, again, we'll be in the mid to upper 90s today, which is about 10 degrees above normal for this time of year. On the lower right, it does show the lingering heat and humidity, especially today. Tomorrow, I think things will be a little bit better in regard to lower heat indices as we go into Friday and Saturday. And then a cold front is expected to impact the state, especially across northern Missouri, and then slowly sink southward into Sunday and Monday, bringing us better chances of statewide scattered showers and thunderstorms. This is the forecast over the next 7 days of precipitation. Take this with a grain of salt. It's a very generalized map. If you're fortunate enough to be under one of those isolated thunderstorms, you can get a lot of rain in a short period of time. But nonetheless, it does look like the highest likelihood of receiving rainfall is generally across the northern half of the state over the next 7 days. Much higher totals as you go into the upper Midwest, anywhere from 1 to over 5 inches anticipated in parts of western Wisconsin. And then I want to keep an eye on what's going on in the Gulf of Mexico. There are indications by the middle part of next week, perhaps even early next week, a tropical system could be impacting the southeastern coast of Texas. And look at those totals, 6 to 8 inches of rain as that system is forecast to move onshore. And that, depending on the track of that tropical system, we can get a lot of rainfall from the remnants of tropical systems. And so that'll be something to keep on an eye on by the middle to the latter part of next week. These forecasted totals could be much higher, especially if that tropical system makes landfall and starts to move in parts of Missouri by the middle of next week. This is the forecast for next week, showing temperatures to, again, remain above normal as we go into the first week of September. It does look like an enhanced likelihood of above normal temperatures across all of Missouri, and it does look like that would put highs perhaps in the upper 80s and lower 90s. What's encouraging, though, is this forecast here on the right of precipitation, perhaps impacts from that tropical system that I just talked about earlier, but also that cold front moving across into Missouri on Monday into Tuesday, or Sunday, Monday, and into Tuesday could bring us some chances of scattered showers and thunderstorms. There is an enhanced likelihood of above normal rainfall for much of the eastern 2/3 of the country for next week. And Kelly, that's pretty much a weather report. Thank you so much, and I'll hand it back over to you.
All right, thank you very much. I did forget to mention, or I did forget to introduce a couple of people. Dr. Lee Miller from campus, Dr. Pong Tien from our plant diagnostic clinic, and Kathy Meacham. And Kathy has changed her name to Ask Questions Here. So send all of your questions her way, include your email address in case we don't get to them today, and we will respond to you at a later time. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our moderator today, and it is Miss Jennifer Shooter. So Jennifer, take it away.
All right, thank you, Kelly, and good afternoon, everyone. Well, you may have noticed that some species of trees are turning color. They may be turning yellow or maybe even have a little red in them. And this often happens in late summer. So this is not the first year we've seen this happen, but we thought we'd let Dr. Hank Stelzer talk about why this may be happening. So Dr. Stelzer, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. So yeah, we're beginning to see some early color change wholesale across the state in pockets, and a lot of that, this is a nice segue from Pat's weather report. Not so much all the wet weather we've been having, but we've had these dry pockets, and trees normally they will go into a kind of a false dormancy late summer. We call it a quiescent state. And that's just what they're trying to do is conserve their resources. They kind of shut down photosynthesis and trying to make it through. If it's prolonged enough, they will just then continue on into dormancy, and they'll tend to change colors. Some of them, are maples. They might go ahead and fire off red. A lot of times they just will turn brown and drop. I'm seeing that with a lot of our yellow poplars in and around here, mid-Missouri in particular. They're dropping their interior leaves. They're dropping to maybe as much as a quarter of their leaves, and they're brown. They're not the typical yellows that we'll see in our poplars. But so it's kind of hit and miss depending upon the species that you'll see, but it's just the effects of this dry weather. And kind of coupled with that is I've been getting reports of acorns being smaller, our pecan growers that are checking their nut fills. Everything is just down again because of that lack of moisture. Most of our hard mast, our hickories, our walnuts, our pecans, and our acorns, they're filling at this time. The acorns are expanding. And so if Pat's weather prognostication kind of holds and we get some moisture in, I think we'll see our nut crops rebound a little bit, but the acorns might be a little bit smaller. And as far as the color goes, they can respond back and come back a little bit. These high temperatures definitely aren't helping. We're actually seeing some leaf scorch, so browning and around the edges, even if the tree leaves do hang onto the individual tree. So, that's a whole lot of generalities there. You might have a specific tree that, particularly if it's been planted, say in the last 5 years, and it was a pot-bound tree that you didn't release those roots properly, and we get where we call stem girdling roots, and that's just where they literally strangle the tree. And so what we can get there is we normally in those situations, even in good weather conditions, we'll see. I get reports every year. My maple is turning brown or turning color now. And it's usually could be a function if it's localized like that. It could be a result of an improperly grown containerized stock. But for the most part, these color changes that we're seeing, it's just Mother Nature's way of kind of shutting down and preserving what precious resources there are. If we come back, we could see a normal fall color, but hot, dry temperatures like this just aren't really conducive to that. Jennifer, that's about all I've got there. I don't know if any other questions have come in.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that information.
Anytime.
Sounds good. So we will now move on to Kelly, who's going to talk about sunflowers. And there's all kinds of sunflowers out there in bloom right now, and they're so pretty. And a lot of us love sunflowers. So we thought it'd be appropriate for Kelly to talk about sunflowers today.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, very good. So yes, this is sunflower harvest season, and I just have to say that sunflowers are certainly one of my favorite flowers. This is a photo of my grandfather and my little brother many, many, many years ago. And my grandfather always grew these beautiful big sunflowers, and I've loved them ever since. And I grow them every year just because not only are they tall and beautiful, but the birds love them. Right now that the seeds are starting to ripen, there's just all kinds of species of birds just flocking around them. One of my favorites is the little yellow goldfinches. So they attract a lot of bird life. They attract a lot of pollinators. They're just kind of an all around great plant. If you've never grown sunflowers before, I highly encourage you to do so because they are very easy to grow. You can just start by direct sowing the seeds in the ground after danger of frost. You can also start the seeds ahead of time so that they'll be ready to go in the ground and you can get a little bit of a head start. And this diagram here kind of shows you the growth pattern of the sunflower from seed to harvest. And you
Kelly,
can see, yes.
Kelly, sorry to interrupt you, but I need to stop you. Your slides are not progressing. So we have not seen anything but your first slide.
Oh, no. Okay. How is that?
I can see that, but can you go back and show us slides 2 and 3 of your grandfather and your brother?
Oh yeah, you got to get a picture of my grandfather in there. So yeah, that's the picture of my grandfather and little brother, and that shows some sunflowers that he was growing. And then here's the goldfinch and some pollinators on sunflower. And then, yeah, this diagram here kind of shows you the progression of the plant. And you can see that now we're kind of getting into the harvest season for sunflowers. So let's talk a little bit about when to harvest and then what you can do once you do harvest. So sunflower heads are ready to harvest when the seeds are plump and fully developed. And let me go back and let's look at this picture here. So these flowers are not ready to harvest. It's mostly just still in the spring stage. But once they get to this stage here in these photos, you can see that they're plump, they're starting to dry, and that is an indication that they are developed and ready to harvest. You'll also see the flower petals start to dry up and fall off. The back of the flower head will start to turn from green to a yellow-brown color, and the sunflower head gets very heavy and it'll start to droop. You'll also start to see some foliage begin to yellow as well. So those are all good indicators that it's time to harvest your sunflowers. So you want to cut about a foot below the bloom when your flowers start to look like this. And if they are not fully dried, you will need to hang them in some kind of a protected area for a while. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, just someplace where it's not going to get rained on, it's out of direct sun, and just leave these flower heads there for a while until they're completely dry. Once they're completely dry, you can remove the sunflower seeds from the flower head, and you can see that process here. They're just removing those seeds and dropping them down in a bucket. And another thing that you can do is I just leave my flower heads whole. I don't remove the seeds because I use mine for winter bird seed. So I just let my flower heads dry. And then as we get into the winter, I will put one of the flower heads out in one of my bird feeding areas and then just let them the birds harvest the flower or the seeds themselves. But you can remove the seeds from the flower head, and you can store the seeds as long as they're good and dry in some kind of a resealable container to be planted next year, or for bird seed, or for any use that you might have for the seeds. And you can certainly roast your own sunflower seeds if you like to eat sunflower seeds. I encourage you to try roasting your own. You can put lots of different seasonings on there. You can make them spicy, you can make them sweet, and there are a lot of great recipes online that you can find to do this. Very easy to do. And then if you do like growing sunflowers, I encourage you to experiment with different colors, different cultivars, get your kids involved. This is a great plant for kids to grow and watch throughout the season and help with the harvest. And I also encourage you to, if you have some giant sunflower heads, enter them in some of your county fairs. This is fair season, And this is a great project, again, for kids to do or for yourself to do. And who knows, you may get lucky and win. Now, after you have harvested your sunflower heads, the stalk remains, and those are pretty big stalks, and they can be kind of difficult to get out of the ground. I usually just cut off the main stalk and leave the root system in the ground throughout the winter, and it'll start to rot throughout the winter, and then I can dig it up in spring, but certainly pull those out if you can. Another thing that you can do is you can use that stalk as a trellis. And you can see here, it looks like morning glory growing up that sunflower, but I'm going to grow some sugar snap peas on mine. And I'm going to actually do that probably this week. Just plant those little seedlings around the base of the sunflower stalk and then let them climb up and use that as a trellis. So that's just another use for them as well. And Jennifer, that is all I have.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Our next topic is insect friend or foe. So Dr. Tamara Riel will present this portion of our town hall.
Thank you. All right, so you can see my screen, right?
Yes, I can.
So thank you. So okay, so everybody, this is your weekly friend or foe chance to tell me what it is that you think it is. I'm going to activate the poll, and you tell me whether you think this is a friend, foe, neither, or it depends. And if you don't have the poll showing up, you can always put this in the chat. I'll give you guys about 10 seconds. All right, so if you haven't put it in yet, take just another minute to, well, take a couple seconds, go ahead and put it in there, and then I'm going to show you guys the results. Here we go. All right, you should be able to see the results now. So it looks like most everybody said that this is a foe, and I'm kind of excited. I am disagreeing with you guys on this one. So here we go. This is what I say it is. It depends. So I'm not totally disagreeing with you because sometimes it is a bit of a foe. So this is a box elder bug. This is normally a neutral bug, something that you probably wouldn't even see for the most part outside. And in the fall, though, it can enter your home or any other structure. And it can actually enter your structure in pretty large numbers and at various stages. And it can be somewhat alarming to see a whole bunch of these bugs entering your home. And so that's where it could be a nuisance. But most of the time, it's a neutral insect and you might not even notice it. So just very quickly, I'll just say if they are coming into your home, or in order to keep them out of your home, make sure that you have good screens, make sure they're in good condition, make sure you've sealed the holes and cracks in your home. This actually solves a lot of the arthropod nuisance problems, just being able to keep insects out. If they do get into your house, there's no need to spray anything. They're not going to be able to live very long in the environments in our home. They do not reproduce inside, and you can just vacuum them up. So that's it for the friend or foe. Back to you, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you. And I think we may have Dr. Trinkline's presentation ready, so I'm going to share it and let him present now. Well, it looks like somebody else is sharing it. Dr. Trinkline, are you sharing it now? I'm not sure
Dr.
what's
Trinkline needs to
going
be made a co-host again.
Okay. It's on the screen, but I didn't share it, so I'm not sure how it got there.
I put it on. Can you see it?
I can see it, yes. So go ahead.
Okay.
But Dr. Trinkline, it's not in presentation mode.
Make one click. How about now?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
There are a few things more discouraging to a gardener than spending a lot of time, effort, into cultivating a particular crop only to at the last minute have it fail, or if you will, something goes wrong with it that makes it less than desirable to the point of unusable. One of these things is called tomato fruit cracking. I'm showing you two different types. On the left is radial fruit cracking, meaning that the cracks actually radiate out from the stem end of the tomato. And on the right would be concentric fruit cracking, where we have a series of concentric circles that form cracks around, again, the stem end. Now, in this case, both of these tomatoes could be eaten. I mean, they're not the most appetizing looking in the world, but especially the concentric, that's really only skin deep. And if you'd peel that away, the interior would be just fine. The radial, you would have to cut off a goodly portion of the top, but the remaining would be fine. Such is not always the case. And here we have a situation of much more severe fruit cracking. You can see in the case of the radial, there's actually some disease organism starting to enter, and that will proceed throughout the tomato fruit, causing it to be inedible. And on the concentric, the same thing is about to happen. You can see the exposed tissue or flesh in the crack, and that's an open avenue for disease entry. Let's take a look at why fruit cracking happens. The primary cause is irregular water supply. This usually is exacerbated in the heat of summer, July and August, because if you recall some of Dr. Guinan's earlier weather forecast, he talked about evapotranspiration rates. Evaporation from the soil, transpiration from plants losing water. And as the evaporation rate, transpiration rate becomes greater, then it becomes more difficult to supply water evenly. What happens, the tomato plant dries down just a little bit, and then we irrigate. The fruits form a sink or a reservoir for the water taken up, and the turgor pressure inside the fruit will increase to the point of overwhelming the ability of the tomato, especially epidermal layer, to keep from cracking, and hence fruit cracking sets in. We'll show you a case study here. This happened at one of our research farms where there was a bit of a problem with one of the drip irrigation system, became clogged or so forth. And of course, until it was discovered, nobody knew that the tomatoes weren't being watered properly. And then when they unclogged it, this is what happened. And just an excellent example of irregular water supply. Just as soon as that tomato plant took up water, it translocated into the fruit. The turgor pressure became just too great. And the result was, in this case, both radial and concentric fruit cracking. So how do we go about managing fruit cracking? The first thing would be to select varieties that have been developed for crack resistance. And those of you who are fanciers of heirloom tomatoes, I don't mean to be facetious, but good luck. You're looking at Brandywine here. One of the faults of the heirloom varieties is that they crack very, very easily. I have seen Brandywine crack in well-watered soil after a shower during the summer, just because the roots took up a little bit more water after the shower and so forth. most of our modern F1 hybrids have been developed for a number of attributes, one of which is the ability to genetically withstand fruit cracking. And by that, we simply mean the cuticle is a bit stronger, the tissue a bit firmer, and it tends to resist that sudden input of water that happens after we irrigate, following what might have been a bit of a dry spill, or we waited too long to irrigate the second time. So uniform water supply, never allowing the plants to become moisture deficient, is extremely important in managing this. And if you do the combination of selecting a variety for crack resistance and uniformly supplying moisture to the plant, the incidence should be minimal, if at all. Another thing is to make sure that we properly fertilize our tomatoes. The elements calcium and potassium have been shown to help reduce cracking problems. Calcium especially. Calcium is an integral part of the cell wall. It's like the cement between concrete blocks that hold a concrete block wall together. So calcium is extremely important, and yet another reason that we suggest when you fertilize your tomatoes with nitrogen, use calcium nitrate. We know it provides all of the nitrogen in the preferred nitrate form. We know the calcium will help to prevent blossom end rot. And now we know that the calcium also will help to prevent tomato fruit cracking. Many of our tomato fertilizers do have adequate potassium in them, but not many, other than calcium nitrate, have sufficient amounts of calcium. Tomato fruit splitting is related, but nonetheless not quite the same. In the case of fruit splitting, you have a gaping wound, such as you see on the screen, that was the result of all of a sudden the liquid inside the tomato heated. As liquids are heated, they expand, and the expansion was so rapid that the fruit could not contain the turgor pressure built up. And this, unless you use them immediately, is really devastating from the standpoint of the utility of the tomato. Certainly, if you're marketing tomatoes, that would not be marketable even as a canner, because the time the people who purchase them and then work them into canning, that might a rot have set in. So again, the thing that we advocate doing in the case of fruit splitting is to make sure we have a foliage cover that's adequate to shade the tomatoes. In the case of high tunnel production in greenhouse growers, they use external shade cloth. In the case of home gardeners or commercial growers who grow in the field, that's really not very practical, so they have to rely on a heavy foliage cover so as to shade those fruit. And there will always be a few sticking out, but nonetheless, it will be minimized if we have a good foliage cover. Fruit splitting is much more of a problem in a high tunnel or a greenhouse where the temperatures get well above what the outside temperature gets, even on a day like today when it's supposed to get 98. And with that said, if anyone has questions, please type them in the chat and maybe we'll come back to them But Jennifer, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Our next topic is on cabbage worm control and an August to-do list. And Kathy Meacham is going to talk about that.
Thank you. And yes, I get calls on this all season. And so the imported cabbage worm or the cabbage white butterfly, it can be very destructive to cauliflower, broccoli, and other plants in the cabbage family. And you've probably seen a little white butterfly flitting around your garden, and it can be seen from spring to late fall. And I just saw a few the other day. They're pretty easy to identify with the white wings and then the black markings. So I had a picture of the larva, and it can be about 1 inch long. It's velvety green in color, and then there's this faint yellow stripes that run lengthwise on the back and the sides. And the eggs are kind of unusual. They're oblong and they're laid on their sides. And so they kind of look like a football. And when they're first laid, they're whitish and cream, and then they turn yellowish. And they do feed on all cold crops. So any of the cabbage family plants, their favorites are, though, they make round to irregular holes in the leaves, and usually those outside leaves. So you'll see them on the outside of a cabbage head. There's 3 to 5 generations a year, there can be. And so it makes control pretty challenging. And some ways for control is early scouting, that's very important. So you want to check for the small larvae and the eggs on the underside of the leaves. You can try growing cabbage really early, before the cabbage worm populations have built up. Bacillus thuringiensis, commonly known as BT, is used for control, but it does need to be reapplied about every 7 days after you see the larva. Just know that it does work best on the small larva, but it could also harm the larva of a beneficial insect as well. Another strategy is some resistant varieties. And so that can reduce some of the damage. Mammoth, Red Rock, Savory Perfection are just a few of the resistant varieties. You can also use an insecticide, and some of the insecticides have BT in it. And anytime you're using an insecticide, you just want to follow the label directions, and you want to make sure that it's safe for the plant that you're using it on. I was going to talk just a little bit too about at our IPM webpage, and we'll put the link into the chat. We have a calendar or gardening tips each month, and those gardening tips, it isn't just gardening, it's vegetable gardening, it's outdoor plants and ornamentals, fruit and nuts, and then the cool and warm season grasses. And so for August, there's a variety of tips to be doing and to be thinking about. And again, we have it every month. This month, it's a few of them are to continue to water your vegetable garden and your flower garden. And if you planted any young trees this spring, this spring, last fall, it's important in a lot of the areas in Missouri to keep things watered. Any of the newly planted trees and shrubs. You can also continue to deadhead geraniums, zinnias, marigolds, and they'll stay blooming and pretty well into the season. Some of those, will bloom until frost. Also, you could start thinking about a cover crop. You need to get that planted before November 1st. Wheat, cereal rye, or red clover are good choices. And one other thing that if while you're cleaning up your garden and when something's spent and you're getting rid of it now, and you may want to compost it, just remember, don't compost any diseased plants or any weeds that have gone to seed. So that is all I had. I'm sorry that I could not get my PowerPoint up. And that's
Okay,
all I
thank you,
have.
Kathy. Okay, thanks.
Uh-huh.
Well, our next topic is what can be planted now for a fall garden? And we know a lot of gardeners like to plant some cool season vegetables. And Tamara's going to talk to us about what you can start right now.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, so yes, we're going to talk a little bit about fall gardening and what you can plant. I am also going to add just a little bit about what to do about the insects as well. So let's talk about what you can do and why we might do a fall garden. So why? Because you might want more vegetables. We don't have to just have gardens in the spring or in the summer. We are lucky to be able to do one in the fall as well. So the first thing you want to do if you are looking at having a fall garden, you need to know when your frost date is. So in the spring, we have a frost date, when it's the last frost date, and in the fall, we have a first frost date. This map shows about when your first fall frost date is. Of course, it can vary depending on the year. So I hope you'll keep coming back to our town hall so that we can share with you the weather report. So here in Jackson County, it's about October 15th when we might have our first frost date. So for me to figure out what I can plant or when I should plant things, I actually go backwards from October 15th back to however many days it takes to harvest the plant. So since we are at the end of August, I'm going to give you some ideas of what you might want to plant now if you haven't done so yet. So if you are going to put a garden in, usually a fall garden is planted towards the beginning of August. And I know it's hard to believe when it's 90 degrees outside that we're thinking of putting in cool season crops, but that's about the time that people typically start planting it. I just put my fall garden in this week, so I'm a little bit on the late side. So I'm looking at this days to planting harvest. And if you look down here, we're looking at about 50 to 60 days till it's time to harvest. So if we look at these plants right here that I have underlined, these are all plants that are in that under 60 days till harvest time. Now, Kathy gave a website that has a list of things that you can do. We have another couple resources that you might want to check out if you were looking for what to plant, and I'll put them in the chat. So one of them is this vegetable planting calendar that we have as a guide sheet. We also have a gardening journal that has information, and then also in our Garden Spade newsletter, we also list the different plants that you can put in there, and I'll put those links in the chat. So what it is that you put in there, they're your cool season plants, the same plants that you would have put in the spring. So this includes these right here. You may have actually planted inside to transplant your broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage to direct seed into the garden. These are going to be lettuce and Swiss chard, radish, spinach, turnips, kohlrabi, carrots, and beets. So all of those cool season plants you can get in the garden, and you should be able to harvest all sorts of wonderful things. Another tool that you will want to look at is the Missouri Freeze Guide, and I will put that in the chat as well. I just got a great little reminder from our Pat Guinan, the weather guy, the weatherman. So thanks, Pat, for that. So let's say right now you put it in there, but we have an early freeze. Well, there are tools that can help you be able to continue to grow your plants. So you can put some sort of a barrier to protect your plants. You could use this kind of frost blanket or throw a sheet over your plants. But if you do that and the ground is still a little bit warm, that's going to protect your plants. And because these are a little bit cold hardy, they're going to be able to handle some light freezes. So let's say you actually are done. It's 90 degrees outside and you don't really want to spend a lot of time outside planting. You have your harvest. There's still probably some things that you might want to put out there. You might want to put a cover crop so that you don't leave bare ground out there. These are some examples: winter wheat, winter rye, clover. Those kind of protect your soil because we know that soil is really important. and we need to protect it the best we can. And if you put in something like clover, it can fix nitrogen, and so it can actually add nutrients. And also it can be create more habitat for our pollinators. And then also just a couple little notes. Kathy touched on this as well. When you are cleaning up your garden, in order to make room for your fall garden, you don't want to put disease-ridden things in your compost, but you also need to be careful about if you have had a major pest problem. So you don't necessarily want to put plant parts that have eggs and other insects that could be overwintering in there. So if you had a major problem, you'll want to get rid of those plant materials, but the rest of it can go in your compost bin. However, that said, please try and leave some things for our beneficials. When we clean everything out, in our vegetable gardens, that might be necessary, but if you have areas where it's not vegetable gardens, if you have flower stems, those are really important to leave for a lot of our beneficial insects who might make nests in the pithy stems. So go ahead and leave those. Also, the leaves, we don't necessarily want them in our lawns. So if you have too many leaves in your lawns, you can mulch those, but you could also move those leaves to another area of your yard where they can actually create additional habitat for our arthropod friends. So that's all I have. Back to you, Jennifer.
All right, thank you. And our next topic is on armyworms, and Dr. Lee Miller is going to talk to us about them.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Let me see if I can share my screen here since that's gone so well, it seems. So can you?
I can see it, yes.
Can you see my screen? Great. All right, so this is one of those banner years, and when we have insects, they kind of, I'm not an entomologist by trade, but I am a turfgrass specialist. These are really hitting pastures and some of our farming community very hard. So armyworms, you can see the little rhyme here that's just been, actually this was just made just a couple days ago. Somebody actually wrote this cartoon. So that kind of just shows how bad armyworms are this year, that, you know, we're drawing cartoons about them. The last bad year we really had was about 7 years ago. We always have them spotty here and there, but particularly in the southern portion of the state right now, in the southwest portion, and even in the southeast portion, we're seeing more and more of these. And I do expect that when we get into later on into next month, we will start seeing them in our major metropolitan areas, St. Louis, and also in Kansas City. There's a number of different life cycles a year. So we're probably at the end of one, and we're going to start seeing some more of these moths start flying around, laying eggs. They kind of have more than one life cycle per year. So we see more than one generation, I should say. This is what the damage looks like on your far left there. I kind of call this the weekend problem. So somebody might go away for a weekend, and these armyworms will march across and really do some significant damage to tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass lawns. They also can harm Bermuda grass and zoysia grass. They're pretty indiscriminate feeders. The endophytes and tall fescue will deter them somewhat. So one of the things that we kind of see sometimes are that one lawn will get absolutely hammered, and then right next door, another lawn will have absolutely no damage to it whatsoever. So these actually will come up from the south. They do not overwinter here. That's why we normally see them in late summer and in the fall. This is what the moth looks like. There's a pretty diagnostic white dot that's on both of those wings. This is what the juvenile armyworm will look like. So they will have a green color. And actually, if you can catch them in this stage, your chemical controls are going to be most effective in this stage. And this is what they grow into as adults. And notice the characteristic Y or inverted Y on the head. And they also will have 4 spots on the back of them. Really, they're unmistakable because they do kind of group together, and you'll see lots of them in your yard when your yard is starting to go down. So scouting is going to be necessary. We don't recommend wide scale insecticide use. because again, they're spotty. They don't happen every year. So we don't recommend a preventative insecticide, which might impact our pollinators and our beneficials. So this is a list. This is from Auburn University, so the Alabama Cooperative Extension Service. This is their list of insecticides that homeowners can get a hold of. You'll notice there the first one, which is BT. That is an organic fungicide, insecticide. So this is based off of that insect, but notice I've got it crossed out. It's going to be too late to use these, and they would have to be put on preventatively. And like was talking about for the cabbage worm problem, you have to put them on repeatedly. So not really a viable option for lawn control. What I want to point out though is all of the next 6 or 5 that are there. Those are all what we call the pyrethroids. And we are seeing consistent and widespread resistance from the armyworm populations to these insecticides. So we are currently not recommending or suggesting to use the pyrethroids. So that leaves 3 at the end. Spinosad is an organic insecticide. And then those last 2 there are what we call OPs, or organophosphates. Definitely do not want to put either one of those on preventatively. So with Spinosad, which is organic, is the one that you would go towards. I'm going to say that the application on lawns, I've looked at a couple of these labels. These are just examples of the products, so they do not imply any endorsement of either one. I do want to point out that it's kind of complicated with the Spinosad label, and also it's going to be kind of expensive. So this is the concentrate. I found a 32 ounce for $45 online. That is going to get you need about 2 ounces, and you need to put it 2 ounces in 3 gallons. So you're going to get about 5,000, just over 5,000 square feet, 5,333 square feet per 32 ounce container. And that's going to cost you $45. So it's a little bit expensive, and you really need to read the label on all of these products when you're applying them, because they can be a little bit complicated to apply. The other one is commonly referred to as Dilex or trichlorfon, and that can be found in this 24-hour Grub Killer Plus. So you can find that over the counter. The next one I want to talk about is Carbaryl. So one thing you may have noticed or may not have noticed is we normally have attributed Carbaryl to the product 7. That has changed. So actually I've got an X there. When you look at the active ingredient, which is really important on these products because they're changing now, you'll notice that the active ingredient is not Carbaryl. It is cypermethrin. Cypermethrin is a pyrethroid. Therefore, on a resistant armyworm population, this would not work. This also is being as a granular as well. So very, very confusing where this is concerned. And what's happened is the label is changed, and they're actually only allowing spot applications to lawns of Carbaryl. So the way that they've gotten around that is that they're going to label it as 7, and they're going to change the active ingredient. In this case, it's got 2 pyrethroids on it, which would not work against resistant populations of armyworm. So I want to make sure that we're looking at the active ingredients. This is another one, and this is 7 Dust, which says it can be applied to lawns. And this one does have Carbaryl in it. So very, very confusing. And this one I'm going to give a kind of a cautionary because I don't really like using dusts. Dusts are easily to inhale. So if you are going to use this, obviously you want to have a lot of PPE or personal protection. You want to be wearing a mask and probably a lot of PPE when you have something that's a dust. So there is one more that's at the end. This Auburn publication was actually in 2019. I did just find this one that is currently on the market, and notice it says Roundup for lawns. You think of Roundup and that's glyphosate. This is an insecticide, and this insecticide, chlorantraniliprole, I can't hardly say it. When we use it on the professional side, it's called acelepryn. This one in particular has been very good for armyworm control. and for a number of different insects. And it is one that is somewhat safer. It also has a pyrethroid that's mixed in with it that is not going to work for those resistant armyworm populations. So this is a very complicated issue. It is developing very rapidly. I hope to have given you a fairly good overview and what to kind of look out for. But if you do have fall armyworms, I would say in your lawns to contact an extension specialist quickly and realize that you're going to have to act quickly when it comes to chemical control before they come in and really do march along and potentially wipe out your lawn. So that's all I have, Jennifer. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much for informing us on what to do about armyworms. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly to wrap us up.
Hey, thank you, Jennifer. Great topics today. So that concludes our town hall for today. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you next week.